Today, I would like to talk about life in Canada 10,000 years ago, focusing on survival, hunting, and early civilization. Around 10,000 years ago, Canada looked very different from how it does today. Large glaciers from the Ice Age were slowly melting, and new land was becoming available for people to live on. The first Indigenous peoples of Canada adapted to these changing environments and learned how to survive using the resources around them. Survival was the most important part of daily life. People lived in small groups and moved from place to place, depending on the seasons. They built shelters from animal skins, wood, and bones to protect themselves from cold weather. Fire was essential. It provided warmth, light, and a way to cook food. Hunting played a major role in survival. Early people hunted large animals such as mammoths, caribou, and bison. They used tools made from stone, bone, and wood, including spears and arrowheads. Fishing and gathering plants, berries, and roots were also important food sources. Over time, these groups developed early forms of civilization. They shared knowledge, passed down traditions, and created tools and clothing suited to their environment. Strong cooperation and respect for nature helped them survive for thousands of years. In conclusion, life in Canada 10,000 years ago required skill, teamwork, and deep understanding of the natural world. These early peoples laid the foundation for Indigenous cultures that continue to thrive today. About 10,000 years ago, Canada was going through a major environmental transformation as the last ice age was coming to an end. For thousands of years before this period, much of the land had been covered by massive glaciers made of thick ice. These glaciers shaped the landscape by carving valleys, forming lakes, and changing river systems. As the global climate slowly became warmer, the ice began to melt and retreat northward, exposing new land that had not been accessible before. The melting glaciers created a wide variety of natural environments across Canada. Forests started to grow in some regions, grasslands appeared in others, and many lakes and rivers formed from melted ice. These changes allowed plants and animals to spread into new areas. Large animals such as mammoths, mastodons, caribou, and giant bison moved across the land in search of food, followed closely by human hunters who depended on them for survival. The newly exposed land was rich in natural resources, but it was also unpredictable. Weather conditions could change quickly, and the environment was still adjusting after the Ice Age. Early people had to learn how to understand the land, recognize animal migration patterns, and locate sources of fresh water. The changing climate meant that people needed strong survival skills and the ability to adapt to different landscapes, including tundra, forests, and coastal areas. As ice retreated, natural travel routes opened up, allowing early populations to move across vast areas of Canada. This movement played a key role in the spread of human communities throughout the region. The end of the Ice Age did not make life easy, but it created opportunities for settlement, hunting, and exploration that shaped how early people lived on the land. The early Indigenous peoples were the first known inhabitants of Canada, arriving thousands of years ago and establishing strong connections to the land. These groups migrated into the region during and after the Ice Age, likely traveling across land bridges and along coastal routes as glaciers slowly melted. Their movement was guided by the availability of food, water, and shelter, and over time they spread across what is now Canada, from coastal areas to forests, plains, and northern tundra. These early inhabitants developed deep knowledge of their surroundings. They carefully observed animal behavior, seasonal changes, and plant growth, allowing them to survive in diverse and often harsh environments. This knowledge was shared through storytelling, teaching, and daily practice, helping each new generation learn how to live in balance with nature. Their understanding of the land was not only practical, but also spiritual, as many believed the land, animals, and natural forces were deeply connected to human life. Early Indigenous communities were organized into small groups or bands, often made up of extended families. Cooperation was essential, as survival depended on working together to hunt, gather food, build shelters, and care for one another. Roles within the group were shared and respected, with knowledge passed down from elders who guided decisions and preserved traditions. Over time, these first inhabitants developed unique cultures shaped by their environments. Clothing, tools, languages, and traditions varied from region to region, reflecting local resources and conditions. These early indigenous peoples laid the foundation for the rich and diverse indigenous cultures that continue to exist across Canada today. Survival for the people living in Canada 10,000 years ago was a constant challenge because the environment was harsh and unpredictable. The retreating glaciers had left a landscape that was still changing. Rivers shifted, forests grew slowly, and new species of plants and animals moved into the area. Early inhabitants had to learn to adapt quickly to these conditions in order to find food, water, and shelter. Life required careful planning, knowledge of the land, and the ability to respond to sudden changes in weather or animal behavior. Food scarcity was one of the greatest challenges. Hunting large animals such as caribou, bison, or even the occasional mammoth required patience, teamwork, and skill. Seasonal migrations of these animals meant that people had to follow them across vast distances, often carrying their belongings and moving between temporary shelters. At the same time, they gathered edible plants, berries, roots, and nuts, which were crucial for nutrition, especially during periods when hunting was less successful. This meant that survival was not just about hunting skill, but also about understanding the cycles of nature and knowing when and where to find different resources. Shelter was another vital aspect of survival. The weather could be extremely cold, especially in areas recently uncovered by glaciers, and storms could appear suddenly. People built temporary or semi-permanent shelters from materials available in their surroundings, such as wood, animal hides, bone, and stone. These structures needed to be sturdy enough to protect them from wind, rain, and snow, while also being movable if the group had to follow migrating herds. Clothing and tools were also essential for survival. Early peoples used animal skins and furs to stay warm, and they fashioned tools like stone knives, scrapers, and bone needles to hunt, prepare food, and make clothing. Mastery of these tools and skills allowed them to live in environments that might have seemed impossible to survive in otherwise. Adapting to the environment also meant understanding natural dangers, such as predators, rivers, and harsh terrain. Knowledge of the land, such as which areas were safe to camp, which plants were edible, and where animals were likely to be found, was crucial. This survival knowledge was passed down through generations and became a central part of early indigenous culture, allowing groups not only to live but to thrive despite the difficulties posed by the changing post-Ice Age landscape. The early inhabitants of Canada 10,000 years ago did not live in large, permanent settlements. Instead, they organized themselves into small, mobile groups, often referred to as bands, which usually consisted of extended families. These small groups were practical for survival, allowing people to move quickly to follow game, find food, or seek shelter in safer areas. Being mobile was a critical strategy in a landscape that was still changing after the Ice Age, where resources could be abundant in one season and scarce in the next. Life in these groups required close cooperation. Each member had a role to play in ensuring the group's survival. Men often participated in hunting large animals, while women typically gathered plants, berries, and roots, prepared food, and took care of children. Elders were respected for their knowledge of the land, animal behavior, and survival strategies, guiding the group in decision-making and teaching essential skills to younger members. Children were actively involved in learning these survival techniques from an early age, which ensured that knowledge was passed down through generations. Nomadic life also influenced the design of their shelters and tools. Since the group had to move frequently, they relied on temporary or portable shelters made from easily available materials, such as wood, animal hides, and bones. Tools and utensils were crafted to be light, durable, and versatile, allowing them to hunt, fish, gather, and prepare food wherever they went. These small, nomadic groups developed strong social bonds, as their survival depended on trust, communication, and teamwork. Decisions about where to move, which animals to hunt, and when to change locations were made collectively, often guided by elders or experienced hunters. Sharing resources, such as food and tools, was a fundamental part of life, ensuring that no member of the group was left without what they needed. The nomadic lifestyle also allowed early peoples to explore and adapt to a wide range of environments, from forests and grasslands to lockshores and tundra. By moving in small, flexible groups, they were able to exploit seasonal resources, avoid overhunting or depleting one area, and maintain a sustainable balance with nature. This mobility was not just a survival strategy, but also a foundation for cultural development, as it encouraged cooperation, innovation, and a deep understanding of the land they inhabited. In Canada 10,000 years ago, early peoples had to find ways to protect themselves from harsh weather, predators, and the cold post-Ice Age climate. Since they were mostly nomadic, they could not build permanent structures, so their shelters were made from natural, readily available materials that were lightweight, durable, and easy to assemble. The choice of materials often depended on the region they lived in. In forested areas, wood and branches were commonly used, while in tundra or open plains, animal hides, bones, and stones were more practical. One common type of shelter was the tent-like structure made from wooden frames covered with animal skins or large leaves. These shelters could be assembled and disassembled quickly, making them ideal for groups that followed migrating animals. In areas where large trees were available, they built lean-tos or simple huts using wood and bark, sometimes reinforced with moss or mud for insulation. During extremely cold periods, they even dug shallow pits or semi-subterranean homes, covering them with branches and animal hides to trap heat and create a warmer living space. The construction of shelters also reflected the ingenuity of these early peoples. They understood how to orient their shelters to minimize exposure to cold winds or heavy rain, and they designed entrances that allowed smoke from fires to escape while keeping warmth inside. Insulation was crucial, and layers of fur, moss, or grass were often added to floors and walls to maintain a comfortable temperature during winter months. Shelters were not just practical structures. They were also social and cultural spaces. They provided a place for families to cook, eat, sleep, and carry out daily activities. Within these shelters, knowledge and traditions were shared, stories were told, and skills such as tool making and clothing production were taught. The design and construction of shelters required teamwork and planning, with everyone in the group contributing according to their skills and strength. Overall, the ability to create effective shelters from natural materials was a key factor in the survival of early Canadians. It demonstrated their deep understanding of the environment, their resourcefulness, and their ability to adapt to different landscapes and climates, ensuring they could live safely and comfortably while continuing their nomadic way of life. Fire was one of the most important discoveries for the early peoples of Canada 10,000 years ago, and it played a central role in their survival. In a landscape that was still recovering from the Ice Age, temperatures could be extremely cold, especially during long winters. Fire provided warmth, allowing people to survive harsh conditions that would have been otherwise deadly. It was not only a source of heat, but also a tool that shaped daily life, food preparation, and protection. Early peoples learned to create fire using natural materials such as dry wood, stone, and plant fibers. They had to understand which types of wood burned well and how to keep the fire going under difficult weather conditions like wind, rain, or snow. Mastering fire making was a vital skill passed down through generations, often taught by elders who had extensive experience surviving in different climates and terrains. Fire was carried from one campsite to another, often in the form of embers stored carefully to rekindle flames at a new location. Fire was essential for cooking food. Hunting provided meat, but raw meat could spoil quickly or carry dangerous bacteria. Cooking over fire made the food safer to eat, more digestible, and more nutritious. It also allowed early peoples to use other resources, such as roasting roots, nuts, and fish, which might have been difficult to consume otherwise. The smoke from the fire also helped preserve food, deter insects, and signal other groups over long distances. Beyond warmth and cooking, fire provided safety. The presence of fire could keep predators away, as many wild animals feared flames. Nighttime became less dangerous and more manageable because fire allowed early peoples to continue activities, communicate, and stay vigilant against threats. Fire also became a focal point for social and cultural life, where stories, knowledge, and traditions were shared around the flames. It created a sense of community and security, especially in small nomadic groups that relied on cooperation for survival. Furthermore, fire had a role in modifying the environment. Early peoples sometimes used controlled burns to clear areas, encourage the growth of certain plants, or drive animals during hunts. This demonstrated not only their understanding of fire as a tool, but also their ability to manipulate their surroundings in sustainable ways. The mastery of fire was not just a practical necessity. It was a symbol of human ingenuity and adaptation. Without fire, surviving in the cold, unpredictable landscapes of post-Ice Age Canada would have been nearly impossible, making it one of the most vital tools in the lives of early inhabitants. Hunting was a central part of life for the early peoples of Canada 10,000 years ago, and it was essential for their survival. Large animals such as caribou, bison, moose, and in some regions, even mammoths and mastodons provided not only food but also materials for clothing, tools, and shelter. Hunting these animals required skill, planning, and cooperation, as the creatures were strong, fast, and often dangerous. Early peoples developed a deep understanding of animal behavior and migration patterns. They observed when and where animals moved, what they ate, and how they reacted to different environmental conditions. This knowledge allowed them to plan hunts that were both efficient and sustainable, ensuring that they did not deplete animal populations too quickly. Seasonal movements were also crucial, as certain animals were only available at specific times of the year. Following these herds meant that people had to be mobile, flexible, and coordinated as a group. The tools used in hunting were carefully crafted from natural materials such as stone, bone, and wood. Spears, arrowheads, knives, and traps were designed for different purposes, from killing and butchering large game to catching smaller animals and fish. The creation and maintenance of these tools required specialized knowledge and skill, and it often involved the whole community, from preparing raw materials to shaping and sharpening them. Hunting large animals also fostered strong social bonds within the group. Successful hunts were shared, and food distribution followed agreed-upon social rules, ensuring that all members of the group, adults, children, and the elderly, received sustenance. Teamwork was critical. Hunting large animals often required coordinated strategies, such as driving herds into natural traps, surrounding them, or using controlled fires to guide their movement. These cooperative strategies demonstrated intelligence, patience, and careful planning. Beyond providing meat, large animals supplied materials that were equally important for survival. Hides were used for clothing, blankets, and shelter coverings, while bones and antlers were transformed into tools, weapons, and ornaments. Even internal organs and sinews were utilized for practical purposes, from creating cordage to repairing clothing or constructing shelters. Hunting was therefore not just about obtaining food. It was a complex activity that connected early peoples to their environment, strengthened social cohesion, and shaped their culture. Their survival depended on maintaining this balance, respecting the animals they hunted, and passing down knowledge and techniques from one generation to the next. The early peoples of Canada 10,000 years ago relied heavily on tools made from stone, bone, and wood, which were essential for survival in the challenging post-Ice Age environment. These tools allowed them to hunt, gather, prepare food, build shelters, make clothing, and create art or ornaments. Without these carefully crafted implements, daily life would have been far more difficult, as natural materials alone were often insufficient for the tasks required to survive. Stone tools were among the most important and widely used. Early people shaped stones into sharp points for spears and arrows, scrapers for cleaning hides, knives for cutting meat and plants, and axes for chopping wood. Flint, chert, and other hard stones were preferred because they could be chipped and flaked to produce sharp, durable edges. The process of making stone tools required skill and precision, as even a small mistake could ruin the tool. Over time, techniques improved, leading to more specialized tools suited for specific tasks. Bone and antler were also valuable resources. Bones could be carved into needles for sewing hides, awls for piercing leather, and fishhooks for catching aquatic animals. Antlers were shaped into projectile points, harpoons, and digging tools. These materials were strong, flexible, and sometimes easier to work with than stone, allowing early peoples to create tools that complemented their stone implements. Every part of a hunted animal was used efficiently, reflecting a sustainable approach to living with nature. Wood was another vital material for tools in daily life. Wooden shafts were used for spears and arrows, while larger pieces could be carved into handles for stone or bone tools. Wooden bowls, digging sticks, and even rudimentary sleds or carrying frames were created to make daily tasks more manageable. The selection of wood depended on the type of task, as different trees provided varying levels of strength, flexibility, and durability. Toolmaking was not only a practical activity, but also a social and educational one. Elders and experienced hunters taught younger members of the group how to select materials, shape them properly, and maintain their tools. This knowledge was critical for survival and was passed down carefully from one generation to the next. In addition to their practical use, some tools had cultural and symbolic significance. Decorative carvings, engraved designs, or specially shaped implements may have held spiritual or ceremonial meaning, demonstrating that tools were not only functional, but also part of the broader cultural life of early peoples. The ability to create and use tools effectively gave early peoples a significant advantage in hunting, gathering, and adapting to their environment. It was a combination of creativity, knowledge, and skill that allowed them to survive, thrive, and lay the foundation for future innovations. The survival and progress of early peoples in Canada 10,000 years ago depended heavily on cooperation within their small groups. And this cooperation laid the groundwork for the development of early civilization. Life in a harsh, post-Ice Age environment required collective effort in nearly every aspect of daily living, from hunting and gathering food to building shelters, making tools, and caring for children and the elderly. No individual could survive alone for long, so teamwork and collaboration became essential skills. Hunting large animals, for example, was almost impossible for a single person. Groups had to plan strategies together, observe animal behavior, and coordinate attacks or drives to ensure a successful hunt. This process required communication, patience, and trust. Sharing the food fairly among group members also reinforced social bonds and prevented conflict. Similarly, gathering edible plants, berries, and roots often involved group knowledge about which plants were safe to eat, where to find them, and how to store or process them for later use. Cooperation extended beyond practical survival needs to cultural and social development. Elders and experienced hunters passed down knowledge, oral traditions, and survival strategies to younger members, ensuring the continuity of skills and cultural identity. Storytelling, rituals, and shared experiences around fire strengthened group cohesion and created a sense of belonging. These early social structures demonstrated the beginnings of organized communities where roles, responsibilities, and rules were shared for the benefit of all. Groups also collaborated in creating and maintaining tools, shelters, and clothing. Toolmaking often required multiple steps, from selecting materials to shaping, sharpening, and assembling them, which meant that knowledge had to be communicated and tasks divided efficiently. Shelter construction was another cooperative activity. Assembling frames, covering them with hides, and insulating them with moss or grass required teamwork and planning. Over time, these cooperative behaviors allowed early peoples to adapt to more diverse environments, expand into new territories, and sustain larger populations. The sharing of knowledge, resources, and responsibilities created patterns of organization that would later influence more complex societies. Even though these early groups were small and nomadic, Their ability to work together, solve problems, and respect the environment marked the foundation of civilization. Cooperation also fostered innovation. By observing one another and combining ideas, early peoples improved hunting techniques, developed better tools, and discovered new ways to manage resources. This collective intelligence and mutual support were key factors that not only ensured survival, but also allowed early Canadian peoples to thrive in a challenging, ever-changing world. In summary, life in Canada 10,000 years ago was full of challenges, but the early people's adaptability, skill, and cooperation allowed them to survive and thrive. Through hunting, tool-making, and understanding the land, they built the foundations of early civilization. Their ingenuity, resilience, and respect for nature remind us that human survival has always depended on knowledge, teamwork, and the ability to live in harmony with the world around us.